couple people, namely our panelists this morning. We have Lori Heineman from Madison Development Corporation. Thank you for being here. And Jason Belangi, who not only chairs our Beyond Compliance Subcommittee, but also is going to participate and talk about issues of accessibility. He is Executive Director, yes, President? Executive Director of Access for Independence, as many of you know, working to make downtowns and other places more accessible for those individuals who need it. So briefly, Lori, do you want to say a little bit about your own background and then we can dive in?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Lori Heineman, President of Madison Development Corporation, and I actually used to be in state government. I was a DMI secretary for many years, but right now I am running Madison Development Corporation. I'm really honored to do it because we own, manage, develop affordable workforce housing here mostly in Madison, some in Middleton. And then we also run financing funds that finance small businesses as well as other housing projects to fill gaps to make sure that the workforce housing projects are built here in the Madison area. So that's a little bit about my background. I mean, I'm the mother of 4 engineers.
That's
and
humble.
I'm a crazy
Yes,
husband
that's your humble background.
and yeah, love living in Madison.
Those things are all relevant too. Yeah, so good. Jason, a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Sure. So I'm, as mentioned, Executive Director of Access to Independence. We are a disability-led and run organization located here in Madison, and we serve all of Dane County, as well as 3 other counties, Columbia, Dodge, and Greene. We're a private nonprofit organization, but we are a federally recognized and funded Center for Independent Living. So we have a number of obligations that we do as far as services we provide. And we also, as I mentioned, are disability led and run, and we're a cross disability organization. So we support folks of all disabilities and all ages. In addition to our direct service work, we also do community impact work, which includes things like technical assistance around accessibility and technology. And we also do accessibility consultation and technical assistance work with businesses and organizations, including a partnership we have right now going with DMI, which will have some announcements coming up in the coming weeks. I've been involved with Access to Independence for 15 years now. I've been involved with the independent living movement for 20, both direct service policy work in our national organization in DC, and then here in Madison with this organization. So really enjoy the work and really trying to improve building disability inclusion and accessibility in our communities.
And I have a follow-up question. Some may not know about the work of the Beyond Compliance was task force and now subcommittee. You've been chairing that for I think 6 years now. We've got several members of the committee that are here today. So I can come in somewhere. Yeah, there you are. Tell the both Quality of Life Committee and Economic Development Committee about the work of the Beyond Compliance subcommittee. Yeah,
so the goal is relatively simple. In terms of how we describe it, which is a fully accessible and inclusive downtown Madison. But obviously that takes a lot of work to get there, right? It's our physical spaces, the buildings, the public spaces that we're in. It's the services and the programs. It's how we support each other in the workplace environments. Those are all the different facets when we talk about disability inclusion and accessibility. And so the task force has been spending the last several years working on some different projects, from just really understanding what are the needs of the disability community, and again, all disabilities, all ages, to figure out where do we focus our work. We focused on accessible festivals and events and did a really helpful guide and a training for folks in that space. Worked on the streetery accessibility for Madison, our outdoor dining spaces. We've also done work around accessible design. We had a forum a couple of years ago. So just it's been a lot of really good projects that we've been focusing on. And when we finished up our last project around streetery accessibility, we felt, what is the next project, or what's the next area of focus? And housing just was overwhelming response from folks in the subcommittee. And it really around that, how do we really focus on that accessibility and universal design in housing, in addition to the affordability factor and just simply the lack of housing that, the insufficient housing, I should say, that is going on here now. So, so that's become our focus. And that through that conversation, it was, there's other folks working in this space. How do we get together and figure out what are the issues? What are other folks working on? What's our lane? Where do we collaborate? And that is what brought us together today.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so you mentioned the number of different touch points you have, right, for those with disabilities and otherwise finding accessible housing, programs they can use to acquire. What would you say is the number one or the top 2 or 3 limitations in those individuals accessing, acquiring housing? Is there anything you can specifically point to, or is it just a confluence of multiple factors?
It certainly is a confluence. I think as far as a few issues of why folks struggle to access housing, one obviously is just inventory, how much housing is accessible and available for folks to access that. In terms of how when we build multifamily housing projects, how we view accessibility and universal design often as sort of a compliance focus or a mandate focus, and how do we move and shift that into really making that more ingrained to all of the projects, more of the units, so there's more availability. I also think there's just a disconnect, obviously, between where there are good things happening, and Lori will talk about some of the work that they've been doing, and organizations like mine, who we deal with housing every single day with folks who contact us, and how do we connect folks to what is available, and how do we be more streamlined in that process, so we can make sure that if there's something available, we can get folks to it. Because too often what we see is there's an effort to make a unit, but then someone who needs it isn't getting it because they're not aware of it and don't get to it fast enough. And so, because again, the high demand we have for housing. So how do we improve some of those processes? I think also when we look at there might be accessibility for units that's created, but does it include accessible routes to bus lines in the metro system, amenities and other accommodations like food access and things like that? How easy is it to get to those spaces from these particular units that exist? And so when those things don't line up, it can create issues for someone who wants to make that leap as well to get over to housing. So definitely a number of different factors. And the last thing I would mention is people just not also being aware of their rights when it comes to housing and fair housing law, and the right to accessibility or accommodations, the right to modifications, and what does that mean for the tenant and for the landlord or property owner. So there's again, a lot of different pieces that come together that I think we're trying to figure out what does that look like in terms of advocacy, and really using DMI as a vehicle to move forward to address those issues.
Lori, does that resonate in your world, or where does accessibility fit within the other lenses that you're looking at as you create a development project, specifically around affordability? But I know every development you've got to bring together, right, a number of different things. Where does accessibility fit or not fit?
Well, we are all in on accessibility and universal design. I don't know if you want to share a couple of slides. And by the way, I have to shout out to an architect who's on our board, Rebecca Prohaska. I'm thrilled to have her on our board. So let me talk a little bit about universal design. So MDC, in the past 4 years, we've developed 4 different projects throughout primarily the city, but one in Middleton. The Grass Camp 44 unit, the Lillian 24 unit, these are all out at the 1900 block of East Washington Avenue. We did the Mifflinder, which is just down the street here at 431 West Mifflin. And then we did a 52 unit in Middleton. Every single one of those buildings were through the lens of James Grasscamp. And James Grasscamp, as many of you know, is a very famous professor, but he was struck by polio at age 17. He was playing a football game, got injured, ended up going to the hospital, contracted polio, paralyzed from the neck down. And I knew this story, and I really resonated it when I joined MDC, because I found out we owned the Grasscamp Park. I'm like, what? We own the Grasscamp Park? How cool is that, right? So I really dug into his story and started with the reading, and really was all about universal design. And what was universal design? What's the difference between that and accessibility? And the difference between it, there's several subtleties, but one of the big ones is that universal design is visible by people of all mobility levels. So when you see, like, for example, if I'm looking at a building and I want to get into that building, this building is universally designed. I can roll in, right? I can roll in with a stroller, with a wheelchair, whatever, I can roll in. But can I get that door open? That's another story, right? So all of these things are really, really important. And it is one of the things that we've learned is that you can build universally designed buildings in a very efficient manner, and it's actually probably less expensive to do so, in particular if you do it right up front. It isn't the bars and all the other things that are a fully accessible unit. It's just people being able to live and use spaces. Let's talk just a little bit about what universal design is. Basically, it has the person in mind. It's equitable, flexible, simple, intuitive, and it requires low physical effort. I mean, I could get in that chair over there and roll myself towards that door, and I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm gonna get it open if I'm in a chair. But we just actually, at our Middleton 52 unit, we had a guy who wanted to use the gym, and he could unlock the door, but in his wheelchair, he couldn't open the door. So I'll get $2,500, put an extra assist on there, that person can get easily in and out of there. So designs that are accessible and usable by people of all abilities, people with strollers, people on rollerblades, not necessarily that.
I don't think we're advocating for
Yeah, no,
rollerblading.
I know, we're not.
We are in a law firm right now.
Right, and the other part is just curb cuts and sidewalk ramps. So I'll show you a picture of the grass camp in just a moment. But you'll notice that our buildings you roll into. So if you go down to 431 West Mifflin, there are some steps for some of those units, but you can roll into the front door. You can make it into that without any curbs or anything. Same thing with every one of our other buildings. The other one, the benefits are improves health and wellness, social participation, and human performance, and increases the value of your property because now you have people of all ages that can live there for life, right? So if you wouldn't mind just going.
Lori, could I add one quick
Yes.
thing? So I think a lot of what we talked about is that related to folks who have disabilities that are related to their mobility.
Mhm.
And I think with universal design, it includes also other disabilities,
Oh,
sensory,
absolutely.
right?
Right.
Folks who are deaf or are hard of hearing, folks who are blind or low vision. We get into folks with chemical sensitivities. There's just so many facets, and that really that key about all abilities, all ages. And we think about folks who are aging in place and older adults. You know, 1 in 2 individuals over 65 has some sort of a disability. Even if they don't consider themselves of having a disability, they still have a condition of some level that can impact their daily activities, employment, things like that. And so universal design addresses all those facets, including the mobility.
So our advocate for universal design, if you want to go to the next slide. It's the famous Jane Nemke.
Yay.
There she is.
A member of the Beyond Compliance Subcommittee.
And Jane, I saw her on TV actually, and I hunted her down and found her, and she was fantastic. So simple things like Jason's saying, it's people of all different mobilities. So if you have a countertop and that countertop has a post underneath it, you cannot get your wheelchair up to it. If you want to make yourself dinner and all of the fixtures are at the other side, you can't reach those fixtures. They need to be on the front. If you want to do your dishes, it's hard to have it swing down when you're in a wheelchair. So maybe you do a pull-out dishwasher. Maybe you do a pull-out refrigerator, things that you wouldn't even notice, but they're very subtle. And I come from a place that my oldest sister was blind and she lived her whole life. She helped build an affordable housing project that, in Harwood Apartments. And she was phenomenal. She never complained, but every day when I spent time with her, everything was a challenge, from folding her money to figure out what that was, to getting into buildings, and to the one thing that was really my pet peeve, when you go out to dinner and someone would say, what does she want? And I'm like, well, why don't you ask her? Yeah, it's the craziest thing. So this perception that Jason's bringing up, I grew up with 2 disabled siblings. I totally get this. And we want to be a really good steward of building universally designed buildings so it's visible by people of all levels. So Jane was our person on that. And then just kind of the last thing is I just wanted to show a quick picture on the next slide. This is some of what we've built. This is high quality, granite countertops, LVP flooring, and Rebecca can attest to our quality. We are able to build these things because we're tax exempt, we're a nonprofit. We do get some units that we do pay, of course, market rate on, but that grass camp building on the left, this is before the sign was up, you literally can roll into that front door. You can roll into the side door. There's underground parking. There's accessibility throughout. This is one of the units in that. You look to the right, that's the Lillian. Fits the neighborhood, it's got those front steps, but we have an accessible entrance in the back, accessible entrance through the parking lot. People can get in and out. And then, of course, the bottom right-hand side, that's the James A. Grass Camp Park rebuild. We're going to be rededicating that this year. That was the first fully accessible park built in the state of Wisconsin in 1989. So that's a long answer, but I'm done now.
Actually, just a quick follow-up on the park. That was inspirational to significant work that Madison parks have done to have fully accessible playgrounds. And either the first or the second, I think it was the second, was at Birmingham Park.
Yes.
Right next to Kurt's project. And it doesn't matter who you are, that park just works for everyone. As a parent of a 2-year-old, I don't even have to watch anymore. I do. But I mean, it's just so accessible. I don't know why. Anyway, I don't know why. Quick follow-up before we get to the next question is, this is about everyone, right?
Right.
And why does this matter for downtown? Well, 26% of Americans have are living with people with disabilities, but who's moving to downtown? The biggest sector, of course, are the 18 to 35-year-olds, but by far, the second sector is 55 plus.
Mhm.
A lot of folks retiring, aging in place. Jason, why is that so important as well? That we're building universal design, we're having accessible places for everyone in downtown, for the aging population as well.
Yeah, I think for so many years in this country, we've thought that when you hit a certain age and you have certain level of need for your daily activities, that the natural progression was to go to another location to live. For nursing facilities and then into assisted living in a lot of these spaces. And folks didn't realize, we actually have systems in place to help provide supports for people. There's a whole other conversation about how people access those and the funding of it. Won't get into that kind of political conversation today, but I think that part of it is those things exist, but our spaces that people live in, the places that people go, the way that they get there and how they get there, those things aren't always keeping up. And so how do we focus on that to make sure people can truly age in place and have their place to live and the places to go and don't have to create separate systems that help support people who have disabilities who are also older adults. So I think it's really making sure that, again, it's that inclusivity, not sort of that separation of the accessible and the non-accessible as well is really important.
So next question is for Lori, but Rebecca's here and other folks that are in that built environment certainly chime in. How can architects, developers, and funders prioritize accessibility from the start of a project, particularly multifamily projects?
So we also get involved in the financing side through our Dane Workforce Housing Fund. So we finance projects. So it's really important for us to understand whether or not that building is being universally designed. But Jane and downtown Madison and several people have been kind of talking about that. So WIDA actually now has in their scoring process that you get extra points if you were building a universally designed process. I would actually, probably toss it over to Rebecca because we work up front with our architects to make sure it is universally designed. But I'd love to hear more from your perspective, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think I wasn't planning to.
See what happens when you show up live? They make you a panelist. Yes.
I think the big part for us is finding the clients that prioritize it. I mean, we sort of try to self-select out. We're fortunate we have clients come to us and say, yeah, none of this matters, but it doesn't have to cost a lot. It's a lot about spending time in design and the thoughtful planning of it and lessons learned on every project. I think we have learned a lot from working with Meteor on the Triangle, more than we ever could have imagined, and we've been passionate about universal design, but how can you do that in a way where you don't see it, you don't experience it, and it just is executed well. So finding yourself a firm that is passionate about it, and then a contractor as well that wants to roll their sleeves and figure it out. But it's from day one how you approach the planning and priorities of it. Yeah,
From the concept site plan. So for example, when I was showing the grass camp, we made
behind you with me raising your hand.
Oh, I see it.
I just had a question on universal design. Is it like LEED certification where there's actually somebody saying this is universally designed and this is not? Or is
No, it's just kind of making a place more livable for people of all mobility levels.
How it works in, like you were saying, Rebecca, from the development side now, we look at, the main thing is, can everybody figure it out and not trying to figure, you look at your project and you say, can somebody get in here this, and you just start thinking that way. It's a good question in the scoring because LEED, you try to score this. You just say, can somebody get in there easy? Do they know how to figure it? Like the door, can they get in? Like here, those doors are heavier than all hell down here.
Yeah.
So you just start from that presence and you have everybody kind of look at the drawings and say, can everybody get around or somebody I know? And it's just a philosophy. Then when you're doing it, your architect and then your general contractor is pricing it out that way at the same time.
So our architect, when we built the grass camp, the whole first floor we wanted to be completely universally designed so people with mobility challenges could live on that first floor. So every single apartment building we build, if it has a 2-bedroom, one always has a shower and then a bathtub. I can't tell you how many apartments I go to and I see 2 bathtubs. How is someone supposed to get in there if you have a mobility challenge? You need to have that shower in there. So all of our first floor, while the cement was being built, being poured, they were poured down for those roll-in showers. And so every single apartment on that first floor, which was only 11 of them, you can have, it's universally designed. And as I mentioned before, just designing where the electric is going to be and where, making it accessible and easy to open from all areas. And that can be done right in the beginning. And I don't think for any additional cost, it's just a matter of planning it.
Just
I
because it comes
also-
on the specs.
Outside of the architecture realm, it's site selection and building in a community that has transportation connection.
Right,
Because, you know, in
absolutely.
the day and age where parking is so expensive anyways, and we're under
Right.
parking developments, it's, if you're at a development, how can you get to the grocery store? So like,
Mhm.
what are their connectivity points? And there's bike scores and walk scores and all sorts of things, but it's looking at how you can connect and get around your community as well safely, which is another thing we've done a lot at the Triangle is
Yeah.
in-site circulation, out-of-site circulation.
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing in our partnership
Yeah.
in redeveloping the triangle was the long engagement process with residents
Yep.
upfront.
Listening.
Because we, as a person who doesn't have a mobility issue or doesn't live with a disability on a day-to-day, I don't know what those needs are.
Mhm.
So instead of making assumptions,
Right.
there's a lot of listening and a lot of engagement that happened
Yeah.
upfront so that we could incorporate all of those in the
Yes.
design.
And where access independence comes in.
Yeah, and I
Yes.
appreciate you mentioning it. That was the point I was gonna make as we talk about who's in the room and making those decisions and where are the disability voices and perspectives in that. And whether it's like helping to get designers and architects to, oh, these are things I don't consider because I'm usually looking at a standard and a standard is checking a box and it's making sure that I've accomplished that, but there's so many little intricacies that I don't realize in the day-to-day activities. And
Yeah.
so that's the cool thing about a project like the Triangle, that it did do that engagement. And I think that right now we see that as sort of, that's a unique situation
Yeah.
instead of the norm. And so part of the work like with this joint committee is elevating the understanding of what we're talking about here and trying to really normalize that so that people think, oh, okay, that's what we're talking about. I didn't realize there was such an opportunity here to do that. And something that Lori and I talked about on that opportunity range is that, as I mentioned in the beginning of my comments, so often this work is sort of viewed as a compliance or an obligation or a mandate versus the opportunity, like you mentioned, the number of people
Mhm.
moving downtown. That's a lot of prospective residents, tenants who are going to be coming into downtown. There's a real opportunity to ensure that those spaces work for everybody.
Mhm.
One quick note to the naming of Jason's committee is beyond compliance for that reason,
Yeah.
right? It's not to be compliant with
Compliant.
ADA, it's to be beyond compliant, right? It's the scenario with training the employee who asks when you're having lunch with your sister, what does she want? Right? That's just unacceptable, right? From
It went on
hospitality.
all the time.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So I used to be a regulator, right? So everything we do at MDC, cover your ears, is regulatory light. I call it reg light. The funds we run reg light. We try to develop projects reg light because the regulations can be such a time suck of all these.
But it's all
forms.
legit.
It's all, yeah, it's all legit. We're good. But you know.
There's 6 attorneys in the room. They're advising you to stop talking now.
But I think Jason's comment, you know, let's make it fun.
When you were ahead of the federal thing in the state, when we were getting all the banks shut down and you had to be mean.
Oh, the year I had back surgery? Yeah, I remember.
I'm sure I will says it.
Yeah.
You had to
I
mean
can't
it.
say Lori
No,
being mean.
No, I was trying to work it out. Anyway, so this thought that you have about changing the perception.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think we ought to come up with something, make it really fun and hey, you wanna be in this group. You wanna be in this group that's making a difference. You're making downtown accessible, visitable, fun to live in. You know, make it fun.
Well, and I'll just,
Yeah.
and trendy, like
And
lead
trendy.
certification became trendy, right? It didn't happen overnight,
Right.
but there's a genuine desire across the political spectrum to have a building that's green because it's efficient, it's
Yeah.
cheaper, it's better in many ways. So how do we apply that same thinking when it comes to universal design, accessibility
And
as well?
strollers, and not just wheelchairs, strollers. People use, carts to haul your groceries in, anything, you know.
We used a cart to get the coffee here this morning.
Well, thank God this
Yes.
place is universally designed.
One quick note, if we're gonna move on, we wanna have a discussion with the whole group about how we can move forward. But one thing I wanna refer to is 2.5 years ago, Jason and the team at Beyond Compliance subcommittee put on an excellent forum on the built environment and the design environment, not just in housing. We had Bill Fadoon, some folks from True Stage with I think it's called the Lighthouse.
Lighthouse, yeah. Awesome.
Incredible building
It is.
on all forms. They had a grand staircase that obviously some people can't use, so they made a grand elevator bank. They have an area where Muslim employees can wash their hands and feet before they pray multiple times a day during the workshop. I mean, it's those sorts of things that we're adding. So please, you go to our YouTube site. All of those sessions were recorded from 2.5 years ago. I will send those out to all of the committees thereafter. Question, and I think sort of a lead in for what's going to happen next, right, is what role can all of us play to be advocates in this work?
You go for it. You're the head of the committee.
I think, as far as part of it is that inclusion in our spaces. If we're working in these spaces now in development and design, and we're making decisions for people, how do we bring people in to help us make those decisions? I think is part of that. And becoming aware, building awareness of these topics. So watching the videos is a good one there. I think also when we see opportunities for projects, are we, on the policy side and the regulatory side as well? Sorry, Laurie, to mention regulation, but are we also getting folks involved there? For example, that the city has a disability rights commission, and what's that role, and how do we make sure that those voices are a part of that as well? But I think for me, coming into the spaces, we've got folks working in different lanes in housing, and yet we're not collaborating. And so what are sort of that gaps? And for me, I think it's figuring out like, what are the gaps? What do each of us not know in the spaces we're working in? And how do we bring that together in a more collaborative fashion to really address it? To get to what Laurie was talking about is making it fun and exciting and a real opportunity.
So I would just add to that metrics, just come up with metrics. Here's the population that you're serving. Here's everybody who would like to have universal design or accessibility in their building and access, as Rebecca said, to transportation. What is that population size here in Madison? And then, I would say, make it just three things that everybody can remember to get people excited about the community that wants accessibility, not just the community that maybe needs it, but the community that wants it. Because they know as a developer, it's going to be more valuable, more usable by a bigger population. What's that population size? I mean, I would just go back to somehow coming up with metrics and make it into 3 points that we can all agree on, and then we're all out there talking about it. And communicating better with the landlords and the services organizations like you. I mean, I'm probably guilty of that.
So on that note, I think, we're talking about this as an opportunity. We're talking about where DMI and other advocates in the community can fit into this discussion. I think that's a natural segue to kind of open it up for everybody in the room and online. I guess I'd invite your thoughts. Does this resonate with your experience? Do you view it the same way? Has anything that's been said match or not match with your perspective? And then are there any opportunities or entry points or initial thoughts on where we as committees or DMI as a whole can be plugging in kind of based on the things that have been shared this morning?
Well, I'll speak about it.
Yeah.
Hi, Samantha. I work for Children's Theatre of Madison, and prior to, I started my job in November. So prior to that, I actually worked 5 years at Madison Opera. And so I have worked on maybe over 20 shows in Overture Center in my tenure, and there are some interesting things that are happening right now there to help with some accessibility access, including like an accessibility card that is front and center in the building. But I might point you in the direction towards larger scale art spaces or larger scale community spaces in town. One of the things in the theater that I have noticed, particularly with Madison Opera, there is a somewhat older population that comes to the opera. There's a very high demand for accessible seats in the theater, which I know is kind of a smaller thing than overall housing, but that is a huge part of population well-being and mental health. And I saw a lot of older patrons who aged out when they probably wouldn't have had to if there were more accessible seats in the theater. And there are actually a significant amount, but that is something that I actually would point you in the direction of, particularly with the Capitol Theater. It is a larger, an older theater. So I know that's kind of niche, but I think that it's super important. I mean, this past weekend alone, we're doing Cinderella and we had 4 service dogs in the theater for people with mobility issues and visually impaired individuals. So
That's
it
so
is,
cool.
yeah, it's being used significantly. And I think the fact that I'm seeing more patrons with either disabilities, physical or otherwise, a lot of individuals with sensory needs, particularly children. I mean, obviously we work with children, but that's a huge space where everyone in town is coming. So we're seeing that like openly, and I think it's being discussed openly, and like it's not necessarily like these patrons are sort of like over here being accommodated. It's like everyone's being accommodated. So I would point you in that direction.
Great.
A little bit biased, but
No,
it's something I
it's great.
see. Yeah, it's like happening, and I'm seeing the need. So.
Great.
Yeah.
And something else I see at Overture is there's also really high demand for hearing assistance.
Yes.
Technology, and Overture is doing a great job. I think you used to have to go to the information desk
Yeah.
on the main floor, and now at Overture Performances, they actually have a kiosk and a volunteer who is like right at whichever venue you have you're ticketed for,
Nice.
helping get people. And it's not just hearing assistance technology. There's also like what do they call
There's
them?
a ton
Like
of
fidget
sensory
seating,
kits. There are
sensory
like
tools.
sensory ear tools. For children, there are boosters and like mobile boosters, which are like kind of fidgety ones if you have a lot of like movement. There's the hearing assisted. There's also a specific thing you can have in the theater called audio description. So for folks who are visually impaired, sometimes there'll be an audio describer at a certain at Opera. We just started it. It's very popular in other cities, but there'll be one performance who an audio describer is describing everything that's happening on stage, not just the singing.
Wow, that's
Like an
awesome.
interpreter right there.
My sister would have loved that.
Yeah, it's really cool, and
Oh.
it's yeah. But there's stuff happening, and there's more like front and center of it. Like, hey, because there are folks who also just want those tools who may not necessarily even have a disability to some extent. Maybe the kid wants a fidget, or someone just is a little sound sensitive. There's lots of folks who could use those things, especially if they're more normalized.
Alex,
Yeah.
do you wanna, you had your hand,
Yeah.
do you wanna chime in maybe from?
I would say, I have a question kind of in the lens of what TJ and I work. You know, we look at Reese Stevens Field, great community asset, walkable, right off the BRT. It's a 99-year-old building. And we've done what we can with what we think we could do for accessibility, primarily with, you know, EDA level stuff. But I guess I'm curious, 2-part question. One, what resources are available for facility managers, building managers, developers, et cetera, for these older buildings? Because obviously planning forward, you can take all these things into account. A 99-year-old building, you can't go back in time. What can we do within the scope of what we have ability to do to make our buildings more friendly? And then how can we work with the city, the landmark commission, all those? And I'm not super familiar with that, but I know there's always hurdles when you're dealing with older buildings and landmarks, things like that, to try to do what we can to make those buildings more accessible.
Right. So I try not to do shameless plug, but actually. If it's there, it's there. I withdraw here.
You're doing great. You don't think that our organization does shameless plugs all the time?
True,
Yeah.
true. I still feel
See
guilty
the
about it for
newspaper.
some reason. I
Yeah,
got
don't.
stop feeling guilty.
Stop.
No, so we do accessibility consultation work. We also do resources. We also work in the technology space. So we have a robust technology demonstration, loan and training program. And so sometimes people don't realize that there might be technologies. We were just talking earlier about her sister's experience with money and how she would fold it. And I said, yeah, I have had or still have a little device like the size of a wallet that can read bills and tells you what you have, right? It's just a very simple piece of technology. And so are there technological solutions potentially to some of the physical space issues that are going on? Would be one suggestion. I also know you have the fan base, the Accessamingos that work there, and I think they provided some guidance if they haven't. But so again, getting more community folks from that space involved as well. At fans who, this is my experience, this is where I'm seeing limitations, but maybe we don't necessarily ask enough questions or enough spaces to do that. So that's another way I would approach it too, is how do you get folks who have those experiences can tell you this is the barrier I experienced to help try to problem solve to get around that barrier. And sometimes again with an old space like that, there are going to be some limitations, but it just thinking outside the box might be some approaches to that as well.
We
Also
also-
hire a good architect. that-
Shameless plug.
Building.
So we have Megan Stern from DMI Local Online. She had a couple follow-up questions as well, or a couple things she wanted to chime in with.
Yeah, thank you. I was making just a few notes. Jason, it's amazing to hear, I'm sorry, not Isthrup. You're always great to listen to too, but Jason, the long, it's really great to hear what the committee's.
Don't worry,
It's always
Megan, I
great to
have a solid
hear,
email. I'm okay.
really happy to hear what the committee's working on. In Dean by Local, we have over 500 organizations within our membership, and we're finding exactly what you're talking about, Jason, that the disconnect we have. So we have a networking event that you'll all be welcome to, but it is just around our organizations that have prioritized housing and commercial real estate woes or trying to tackle that in 2025. So they are going to be the hosts, and it'll be a social networking experience where everyone can just kind of be in one space and hopefully start that conversation or keep that conversation going like the committee is doing. We always work with a much broader audience outside Madison. And I would say that everything you're saying is amazing. What we see is it doesn't make it beyond the edges of Madison. And I know that for you, you're thinking, well, we are Madison, that's what we're working on. But if you see it as a whole destination, people want to get to Madison, they want to live here, they want to shop here. They're going to want to also go to art museums, maybe in Oregon, Wisconsin, or they're going to want to be part of the whole community. And I would encourage too, that as this committee moves on, or any opportunity we can have to branch out that conversation beyond the edges of Madison, pull people in. I was just talking to one of our local communities who they're working on housing right now. They don't have the sewer capacity, but nobody's talking about that because, right. So there's all these like little glitches that are happening once it pushes beyond where all this really awesome brain space is at. So keeping that open, utilizing resources like Dean by Local or other organizations that communicate out, trusted messengers in the community to get that information out. Please include us whenever you can, because we have a big reach, and it's not all just in the downtown area, which is great, but it's just needed. I think that was it. The only other thing I've run into, and I'd love to hear any feedback on it, is putting ourselves in the position of meeting with developers, locally developing businesses, and hearing the list of reasons they have for not wanting to do something on the front end. And the amount of effort it takes for every individual to get through to a building director at a developing company to why the expense is worth it on the front end and not wait till it's mandated on the back end. Or because, does that make sense? We face that a lot. The developers will just look you right in the face and go, not interested. And so like that brick wall is pretty brutal, especially in the area surrounding Madison. So that would be, any tools that you can, or any opportunities to get those people in the same room so that it's, the education is spreading out, why solar is important, why accessibility is important, why universal design is important. So
Lori, on that
yes, it's
front,
important.
to Megan's point about, developer will just sit there and say, not interested. That was also the case in the 80s when the ADA was first passed, right? I mean, there were opinions and other things written like this is going to decimate the US economy because we're going to render every building obsolete overnight. That has not happened, right? And ADA has evolved, but I think I've also heard you say, and others say, it's not enough, right? We have a beyond compliance task force and subcommittee. You're talking about WIDA scoring and other incentives, right? Where does the current regulation, where does it fall short, or kind of where is that boundary between where things currently are in terms of what's mandated, where these developer doesn't have the right to say not interested, they're required, versus where we're looking to get to? Is there a clear line or is it really kind of?
You know, 20 years ago, I would have put my regulator hat on.
Yeah.
But now I'm gonna put my nonprofit hat on. Make it easy and make it fun and say, this is why you want to do it. Here are the metrics. Here's the population. Here's a group of people over 55. People want to age in place. So build your building to make sure people can age in place and be able to make usable spaces and visitable spaces, because it will increase the value of your building, whether you're market rate, whether you're affordable. You got to make it fun and you want to be a part of this group. I wouldn't say just the whole idea of compliance and regulation. Obviously, we all need to follow these things. You know, we're in the housing business, but that's already so overwhelming that they just like, you want us to do what? You want us to do one more thing? No, I think if you just focus on, hey, here are some tools. This is what we're seeing. Here's what's happening across the United States. Here's the market we're trying to serve. That's probably the market you're trying to serve. How can we make it more attractive for a lifelong place to live? You know, whether it's, we're seeing a lot in our Dane Workforce Housing Fund now. We actually, Fund 1, we only did workforce housing for properties that didn't have any age restrictions. Now we actually will do senior housing, because we know there's a lot of seniors that are working. And we also know that that is a population that really has a very high need. It's very hard to get into places now that actually, you know, the different assisted living, but I'm just talking about people. I don't even know what the age is. I even say it's 55 and older. I'm in that group, but that's okay. That's okay. Active adults, you know, who are biking and skiing and all that stuff. You know, but this is a huge market, but they don't, if something happens to them, they like, you know, wipe out on their bike or cross country skiing and they're on crutches. You know how hard it is to get back into your apartment and into your building? I had to start doing push-ups after I wiped out on my bike because I absolutely could not lift my body. So these are reasons why developers want to be in that game. And I think if you can convince them to do that, they'll do it. And if it's not, doesn't cost more money particularly.
I think that's a really good point. Like, you know, to make it appealing to developers, to legislate it would be really hard and to build enthusiasm about it. But when you think about it, all the things that you've talked about with the universal design really aren't necessarily needed to be legislated. It just, it almost gets to common sense. And how do you make this, you know, you hit it before, how do you make your building more appealing to a broader audience and longer term? I mean, there's so many pluses to it when you really get down to it. I think highlighting some of those things make a lot of sense.
Well, I'll go, your question on rehab for historic buildings, just on East Washington nearby us, we have 2 historic buildings, the old 701 building, and all those buildings back then were half story out. In the 701 building where the high noon and all that is, everything's accessible, how we work through it, elevators, how you jump up and everything else, but I wasn't using any tax credits on that. The Cluter building, which became the Indigo Hotel, was designed in 1950 by Alvin Small that worked for Louis Sullivan. And it had a very intricate brick thing. But what you do if you're dealing with historic, you go talk to Heather Bailey. We have a very good historic person that says how we can do. So if you're doing with changes, because if you're going through your tax credits, you have to deal with the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. And then so how we tie the old part to the new part, and even the Palette restaurant, which just transferred license last night, I have a 2-story kitchen. And it's actually more accessible because we have a big platform elevator where everything rolls on that. We even had people that worked in the prep kitchen down below that could take the wheelchair down there and tie it in. And we did that on that site to get the
That's so
tax
cool.
credits.
It's a great building. I love that.
But it's all designed that way.
This is great. This is great. All right.
When I'm saying what we
Welcome to the board.
So what I'm saying, when we work on new projects now, we go in the AutoCAD, but then we go into the model of the Revit. We're gonna see all that, because when you want to put that reduced down shower, am I post tension? Where's my rebar go? Am I plank? If I wood construction, what's that? How do you back to back it? Because you have to plan that up, because if you do a change order later on, you've already got the bid on the rebar, how they tighten it. So you go in from the beginning, you set where it can go, and then you work for different ways to go. So you just go in that for the beginning. But what we do now, what we call in, is the Revit, where everything pops into it. It's all 3D, and every sub goes into it. It's beyond AutoCAD, and you start from that premise. And I want to go on regulation we were talking about. Last night, I'm changing the license for Palette to us, and I'm sitting there at ARC that got all this hung up because 2 meetings were there at one time, but they have a recommendation. And when you come up there, did you call this? Did you do this? Did you do this? You do this. So basically, same may not be a regulation, but everybody coming up knew they had to have a neighborhood meeting. You had to notify them, but if you didn't have it, it was fine. So you set a criteria other than something, but we have a very good historic with Heather Bailey. You go to her right away. She can tell what you do, or if you need stuff, compliance on it, then you begin tax credits. Department of the Interior will help you out on that. So you just start from the beginning and you get in the model, you work through
Start
it.
from the beginning.
Because if you
That's
try
it.
to change that later on,
Start from the
your
beginning.
drawings have to be changed, your contract have to be changed, and now you're not even post-tensioning,
That's
rebar,
your
all
tagline.
changes.
Your architect.
University
Yeah,
design,
so-
start from the beginning.
So actually, that's exactly right. So,
Yeah.
so what the goal
I
of
love
this
that.
group was, and I want to get, there's a couple comments in the chat so the whole room understands. But I actually think we did just find our tag, like, we want an action from this. We don't, the conversation has been rich and ripe and important, but we need to move to action, right?
Mhm.
And start from the beginning is gonna be the tagline of the new work, of the new group. But I wanna make sure we have a couple of comments. Pam Christensen says, preach, Lori. There you go.
Okay. I don't like you said that.
Jenny Jeffers says, I appreciate you bringing up older adults as part of the conversation and accessibility for them. A growing population in Dane County with very poor housing choices. So thank you, Jenny. And then Taylor Redondo had a question about resources, PDF toolkits for accessibility at events, which I can't believe was in 2021. I said it was last year. It was in 2021. DMI published a report based off of some reports in Toronto and a few other cities. Yeah, a guide.
Oh, that's
Guide,
nice.
thank you, guide. I don't keep saying report, guide, thank you.
Being
So
a
that is
guide.
available on our website. If you just go to our Beyond Compliance section in our work, it is available there. So back to start from the beginning, the new name of the task force that is going to be working on these issues. We wanted to bring it to all of these different committees because it affects quality of life. It affects economic development. It obviously affects Beyond Compliance. So we're gonna make a hybrid working group called, what was it again?
Well,
Start from the beginning.
start from the-
Yes, start from the beginning. If people are
Kurt's
interested
idea.
in joining, Kurt Brink will be the chair then. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Then if you're interested in joining this new working group, which will meet, we'll meet once or twice to figure out our where we're gonna go, how we're gonna advocate, and how we're gonna move forward with this work. A lot has been done already. If you're interested in joining, please come see me after the meeting if you're live, or send me an email, no one can spell my last name. You can
We
figure
know
it out.
who you are.
Yeah, you know who I am.
You come up on
Find me on
that.
LinkedIn,
Yeah.
send me a note to join this new working group that's gonna be part of this. We think we can move this work forward. Couple of updates in the last couple of minutes here on DMI. We've got some big things happening. And we've got 3 committees here, so I'll just kill 3 birds with 1 stone here. First, big news on DMI strategic visioning work, or I'm sorry, downtown Madison strategic visioning work. The DMI and the city of Madison are heading up. This is a project we've talked about a lot in this committee. We have to do a lot of fundraising. We just received a massive commitment from Jerry Frauchi and Pleasant Rowland for $250,000 as a matching gift. It is a matching
Wow.
gift.
Oh.
We need to raise about $150,000 more. So please, you can come see me after too, if you'd like to participate. Not all kidding aside, because I'm really serious about that, but we are so much closer to our goal. So much closer that we hope Emily, right, to start this work, although the city just maybe slightly pushed it back. I would say April or early May, we will start this work. It'll be a 12-month process to do full, first time ever strategic visioning plan for downtown Madison. That plan will then help inform the city's land use plan, the downtown plan, which they say will start
Oh, very
in
good.
mid-2026. We are working directly with the mayor's office, Matt Wachter. We had an excellent meeting with a ton of folks a couple of days ago. We are moving forward with this work, and it'll start, we'll just say early Q2. Also very exciting, another part of downtown is Regent Street. Downtown Madison Inc. Nathan and several folks have been part of this for a long time. We've been working on something called the Regent Street Group for about 10 years now. Dan Seeley, myself, Pam Christensen, a few others. Been doing this work a long time. We've got a work product. Brian, thanks to Brian and the team, and Rob Gottschalk at Van Wall and Associates. There's an amazing Regent Street vision, a draft right now that is going out. We just met with the city, Emily, was that last week? Last week, two weeks ago? Yeah, yes. It is a dynamic plan for what Regent Street could look like with what's happening at the CDA site, with Bayview, with atmosphere, with chapter, with all of these projects that half of them I can't even name because they're not public yet. There's a lot happening, but what's the vision for the street? Right now, literally the street works for nobody, right? Not even a single occupied car, which is what almost everything works for, right? As someone that lives on the near west side, good luck driving home. Trying to figure out what that looks like. There is work that is going to happen, significant work. The street will be redone. It was supposed to be redone in 2026. The city has pushed that back to 2028. There is an opportunity that if everything goes great with John Nolan and Park Street, that it could be late 2027, but I'm going to guess 2028. So there is planning to happen with this visioning. We've got all the major parties. This group of 45, it is the neighborhood associations, it's everybody, it's alders, it's the major institutions, UW Health, UW Athletics, SSM, Steve Brown Apartments, MG&E. This is the right group. We will be discussing this more thoroughly at our March What's Up Downtown Breakfast. I don't have the date on me, but
24th.
Thank you, 24. Wow, Dan Seeley coming through the 24th. Please join us there as well. This is very exciting work. Last up, again, join us next week, a week from today, at a What's Up Downtown Breakfast, or tomorrow for a Madison Milwaukee Downtown Exchange, where we talk about federal government policy. I just want to say a huge thank you to first our committee chairs, to Jason Belangi at Beyond Compliance, to Peggy Gunderson, who I think is now in transit, but Peggy, thank you, and Ben Schmidt from Economic Development. And I want to shout out Amy Supple, who I know is on as well, who was the chair of Economic Development when this first issue came forward, and our panelists. Jason, thank you again. And Lori, and all of you that participated in this rich discussion. Again, if you're interested in joining, start from the beginning, task force working group, please send me a note. So thank you all very much. And thank you for your support of DMI in downtown. 9 o'clock.
News Radio DMI, this is